Aunt Harry placed Dresden china on the table in front of us. I just said you're an alcoholic. I stated a fact. That's all I ever do, state facts. A rose tinge came to Mrs. Klein's chalk in her cheeks. But really now, I don't drink that much. You think I drink that much, Oliver? If you was to die tomorrow, Etta Klein, they'd be afraid to cremate you with all that alcohol you've got in you. You'd start a conflagrating fire. What? Mrs. Klein said, tapping the black satin around her brooch. Isn't she a comedian, Oliver? Conflagrating? I don't think she's funny at all. Her laugh, with mahogany teeth, was the sound of soft rifle shots, but quickly she stopped it and turned towards Aunt Harry and the silverware. Anyway, I may not get cremated. I may have Jerome bury me. You'll get cremated. Not if I don't want to. All Jews get cremated, don't they? Mrs. Klein drew out a grand handkerchief of Brussels lace. Dearest Harriet, you're so ignorant about Judaism. That's one area I think you ought to just stay clear out of. Well, I'm only going by what I've heard and what I've seen. You cremated Sargent, didn't you? You had your own son cremated. Now just try to tell me that that's exaggerating. Quietly, Mrs. Klein looked dead into Aunt Harry's dark face, dabbing all the while her Brussels lace to her goitered neck. Sargent, Mrs. Gibbs, asked to be cremated. He chose to be cremated. Sargent. Sargent. I never knew what to do about ladies crying, and at Green Acorns both of them cried usually at the same time or in close sequence, once earlier in June, when then they thought Della was made pregnant by a farm equipment salesman from Chicago. She wasn't. Della lied to soften them up for a raise in salary. They both began to cry, Mrs. Klein in barking, suffering noises, and Aunt Harry in a whinny. I had said, "Stop, Mrs. Klein, it's all right." And then I ran over to console Aunt Harry with, Now, Auntie, it's all right." And then back again to Mrs. Klein. It was a relay race of sorts. But worse was the aftermath. Mrs. Klein, who apparently needed to pay penitence for an excess of sentiment, chose me to help her expiate her venial weakness. We would dig weeds in the hot sun, or wash PG, the cat, or sometimes it took a cerebral form, and I would read to her Wordsworth poems. With Aunt Harry, the aftermath of a crying spell was less physical, but no less painful. Admonitions and sneers came from her pony face, a face chock full of wrath.